Audio mixing can be hard if you don't put the right strategies in place and set yourself for success from the very beginning. Hey, I'm Adrian from adrianmilea.com, and today I'm going to share with you 15 essential strategies that will help you improve your mixes. Just a heads up, if you will use these tips, your mixes will improve long before touching a single fader. Before we dive into the meat of today's episode, if you want to improve your mixes and masters in less than 10 minutes, go ahead and download your cheat sheet here. In the meantime, I'll play my awesome intro. Okay, so let's begin. Number 1, get better at audio production. If you're an audio producer and want your mixes to sound professional, the first thing you can do is to get better at audio production. When I started producing music in the box, my tendency was to fill every hole in the mix with different instruments and ideas. While this is cool for getting as many cool ideas as possible out of your system, you need to stop at some point and make some compromises. Remember this. A professional sounding mix starts long before touching a single fader. What do I mean by this? First, you need an idea for a song. Then you need to compose a melody. If you want to include some lyrics, there's the songwriting stage, which works hand in hand with the production stage. In case you want to include original vocals and live instrumental parts, you'll have to take care of the recording stage. And all these steps happen before you get comfortable in front of your mixing session. I talk in detail about these stages plus the audio mastering stage in my music production masterclass, where I show you how to convert an idea you got on your phone into a polished mastered song. If you're interested, definitely check it out. What I'm saying here is that there are important steps that you need to take care of before the mixing stage if you want your mixes to sound professional. For example, if your project doesn't breathe at the production stage, there are less chances it will at the mixing stage, unless you take out some of the tracks during that stage. While there are tons of tips that you can use to improve your audio production, I have one very important for you here. At the production stage, avoid making the bass track hit at the same time with the kick. This way you will avoid a lot of conflicts in the low end later during the mixing and mastering stages. Number 2, use quality samples at the production stage. If you want better sounding mixes, you need to start using better audio samples and virtual instruments. In other words, if your production sounds thin and weak, you need to review the instruments and the samples you're using. This is crucial. Why? Because a weak production can be improved only to some extent at the mixing stage. If you want more information on how the audio samples you use affect your production, I have a video that discusses exactly that. In short, audio production and audio recording stages are crucial for professional sounding mixes. Number 3, record better audio. If you want your mixes to sound professional, you need to start recording better audio tracks. I'm referring here to both vocal and instrumental tracks. Why? Because as it is the case with audio mastering, at the mixing stage you need a good audio source. While there are ways to repair audio, no amount of processing will improve a poorly recorded vocal or instrument. That's just a fact. So in case you're recording audio for your sessions, improve your audio recording techniques. This will help you in getting better sounding mixes. Number 4. Set up your listening environment. No matter what pair of monitors you use for mixing music, the room you're mixing in greatly affects how the sound from your monitors travels to your ears. In order to make your mixes sound professional, you need to judge and make your mixing decisions based on what you're hearing. Therefore, if what you're hearing when you're listening to your mix is not accurate, your mixing decisions will also be inaccurate. This leads to poor mixes, frustration, and the feeling that your mixes are the worst on the planet. How do I know this? I know this because this is exactly how I felt when I started my own in-the-box music mixing journey more than a decade ago. That being said, most music producers don't have fancy and professional audio mixing studios. In our case, while we have a studio acoustically treated specifically for audio work, this is not the case with my home studio, which is full of acoustic problems. The room is small and boomy. Luckily, there are things that you can use to improve the acoustics of the room you are mixing in case it has such acoustic problems. For example, in case you experience a long echo or reverb in your room, start by bringing some clothes and experiment by placing them in different parts of the room to diminish the echo, for example. Add some foam on the walls and see if it helps. And you can also add bass traps if you're experiencing boominess when listening to mastered music. As a side note, there are also drapes that could help you acoustically in case there's a window near your listening position. So use whatever you can to make your room silent. You don't need to make it sound dead, but at least a decent place where you can mix. Number 5. Set up your studio monitors correctly. Usually when people complain that their monitors are not good for audio mixing, avoid to first take a look at where they put their monitors, or the room where they are listening to those monitors. Also, how they set up the monitors relative to their listening position. This is why if you want to make your mixes sound professional, it is crucial to take care of the room you're mixing in first. Then set up the monitors correctly. How do you do that? We already talked about improving the acoustics of a room if you want to mix in it. In the case of monitor placement, there's a really simple formula that you can start and experiment with. Let's say that you have a room with your monitors. The first thing you need to do, unless you have a mixing desk where you can also put your monitors, use a pair of monitor stands. Avoid placing the stands along with the monitors near the front wall, or the wall that you're facing when mixing. This will avoid creating extra acoustic problems. But how much space do you need between the wall and your monitors? I would say at least 3 feet or 1 meter. Next, place your chair in the position you will be mixing. Then measure the distance between your listening position or your head when sitting on the chair and a monitor. This distance should be the same exact distance between you and the other monitor, but also the distance between the two monitors, exactly like a triangle. And by the way, ideally, the two monitors should have the same distance from the front wall, but also from the lateral ones. In case your listening position is near your back wall or the wall behind you, you might experience boominess and more low information when listening to music. And this is why it is really important to set up your studio monitors correctly in the room that you have. Also, some monitors have different profiles, providing you with some switches that you can use to improve the sound that gets to your ears. In case you want to use such profiles, be sure to listen to good mastered music, so that you can have a reference. I also highly recommend you to use pads between your stands and the monitors to avoid unwanted resonance. In my case, I have a pair that came with the Genelec monitors when I bought them. Also, it is important to set your studio monitors at your ears level to get the most of them. Another tip I have for you here: the more problematic room you have, the nearer your listening position relative to your studio monitors should be. This way, you avoid more acoustic problems and get to listen to a more true sound of your mix or master. Number 6. Do one thing at a time. If you are a music producer and you produce the song you're about to mix from the very first note, I have some old news for you. You need to set your mindset straight. You finished the music production stage, it's done. Now it's time to make this awesome production of yours even more awesome by mixing it. In general, we tend to think that we can do so many things by multitasking. As an example, when you're composing or even producing, you start adding layers of instruments with different compressors and EQs and other things that should be done or taken care of at the mixing stage. Why do you do that? Because you think that what you're doing will shorten your path to the best sounding mix ever. Unfortunately, this is not the case. As human beings, we are physically limited. This is why most of us perform better when we're doing only one thing at a time. So if you're producing, produce. If you're mixing, mix. But why is this important? When you're doing one thing at a time, you are improving your productivity and focus. There's no phone or social media app to bother you. It's only you, your DAW, and the song you're about to mix. That's it. And if you want more information on why doing one thing at a time is the way to go, not only when you want to produce or mix music, but in life in general, check out the book The One Thing by Gary Keller. Number 7. Take out all the effects from your tracks. When you're producing, usually different instruments have different effects, like reverbs, delays, and so on. And they are awesome and make your instrument sound big and powerful. The problem is that different virtual instruments like Spire, Massive, Silent One and so on have different sounding reverbs, delays, choruses and so on. And that, my friend, is a great recipe for poor sounding mixes. Why? Simply because lots of virtual instrument effects are poor quality effects. This is why there are very good reverbs on the market, like the VSS4 HD Native from TC Electronic, for example. I made an in-depth review of it, so go check it out in case you want to inject some awesomeness into your mixes. However, most of the time, the stock reverbs you have in your DAW will do a better job for making your mix sound as a whole. This is why I'm recommending you, in case you want your mix to sound professional, take out all the effects from the tracks of your mix and add your own effects. That being said, you can still use the effects from your instruments, but be aware that this will affect the quality and the space of your mix to some extent. Number 8. Convert MIDI into audio. If you produce the song you're about to mix, I recommend you to convert the MIDI tracks into audio tracks. And there are 4 main advantages for doing this. First, you will focus exclusively on audio tracks and won't be distracted by the MIDI tracks, which are always very tempting to change. And second, by converting MIDI into audio, you can make the virtual instruments inactive. This way, saving more CPU power and RAM for audio mixing processing, that is, unless you have a very powerful computer in your studio. Also, when you have the audio sample information of a track, you can automate or edit the parts you don't need. Another great advantage of converting MIDI to audio, you can take care of gain staging much easier. Number 9. Arrange the tracks in your session. When you're producing music, there are different scenarios that you can start with. Maybe you start with a piano idea and you build from there. You can also start with a kick, a drum loop, or even a bass line. And then you start building your song little by little by adding different tracks. And until you finish producing the song, your tracks could end up all over the place in your session, unless you arrange them to some extent from the very beginning. If you want to mix faster, you need to know where a certain track is in your session. This is why I highly recommend you to arrange the tracks in your session so that it can make sense, at least to you, so that you can access them as fast as possible. In my mixing sessions, I usually start from the left with the kick track. Next to the kick track, I set the rest of the drums, bass, guitars, piano, strings, lead vocals and effects. This way I know where a certain track is in the session, both in the edit and the mix windows. I also recommend you to use colors or to color code different types of tracks. You can use a color for the drums, for example, one for guitars, another for vocals, and so on. Optionally, you can also use the same colors on the samples inside the tracks, like in the edit window in Pro Tools. These small adjustments and strategies will definitely help you in finishing your mixes faster. Use gain staging. We have more freedom in the digital domain in the terms of audio production and processing. That being said, gain staging is overlooked by so many audio producers who want to learn audio mixing. Still, while this is not a very big deal at the mixing stage, if you want your mixes to sound professional, you need to use gain staging in your mixing sessions. Why? Because there are plugins on the market which emulate real hardware and are built with the gain staging in mind. This way, if the audio source is entering too hot into the input of those types of plugins, this could create unwanted distortion, which unattained could lead to lack of transparency and space, harshness, and other unwanted effects in your mixes. Also, an optimal gain staging will lead to optimal processing by those types of plugins, but also it will help you in achieving a better sounding mix. But how can you improve your mixes with gain staging? First, you will need a VU meter. There are plenty on the market that you can get for free. Next, you'll need to set the levels of the audio tracks in your mix to at about -18 dB. This way, each track of your mix will have about 18 dB of headroom, and this is a healthy headroom to have for your mixes. I have a video which shows you exactly how to do this, so check it out in case you need it. Number 11. Use buses. If you have a mixing session containing more than 10 tracks, I recommend you to use buses. This way you have more control over your mixing session, but also you can divide your big mixing session into small chunks. Depending on the mixing session, I usually create buses for drums, bass, guitars, music for different instruments, vocals, effects, plus a mix bus where I send my entire mix. Rarely I use a mastering bus in case I want to master the mix inside the mixing session. By using buses, you have more control over your mixing session, but also you can apply individual processing on the individual buses in case you need to. Number 12. Use groups. While using buses helps with slicing a big mix into more controllable parts, I also recommend you to group your tracks. For example, if you have more layers for a kick or a lead or electric guitars and so on, you can group them. After you set the volume relative to each guitar track, for example, group them. And in case you need to bring more volume to all the guitars when mixing, you can bring all the faders up or down, this way keeping the balance between them. Groups are also very useful when you want to mute a group of tracks. And just a heads up, if you intend to use groups while also using basses, when you bring up or down the volume of groups, check if those groups are sent to certain basses. And if they do, check how the processing on the bass is affected by the group volume change. But why is this important? In case there's only an EQ on the bass, you're fine. However, if there's a compressor on the bass which the group is sent to, there will be a difference in the processing. The more you'll bring the group volume up, the more compression will be applied on the bass. The more you bring the group volume down, the less compression will be applied, or if any at all. So check the processing on your basses often. Okay, next one, set up blocks of audio mixing time. Before listening to the first sample of the song you're about to mix, set a countdown timer for 45 minutes to 1 hour. When the time is up, you need to get up and go drink some water. Hydration is very important, but also your ears rest. Don't think for a second that if you mix a song for 5 hours straight, it will sound professional. Most of the time it won't. Because as in the case of your eyes, back, hands and so on, your ears are also getting tired. Especially if you are mixing at unhealthy SPL levels. And when you deal with poor acoustics, wrong monitor and listening positions, lots of unneeded effects, plus tired ears, the chance of getting your mix sound professional is very, very small. This is why I recommend you to take care of your ears not only for mixing or mastering purposes, but also for your well-being in general. Number 14. Control the SPL or listening levels. We tend to think that louder means better. This is why so many audio plugins companies set their plugins to sound louder when you insert them on your tracks. And that is to make you think that you have just improved that particular track only by inserting that particular plugin. However, this is not the case most of the time. Same goes with your listening levels. When you're mixing or mastering, your listening levels are crucial. If you're listening to soft levels, you might not anticipate what your next mixing move should be. If you're listening to loud levels for a long period of time, your ears will get tired faster. You'll think that your mix sounds great and big, but the next day you'll realize that you'll have to start all over again. How to avoid this? Listen to healthy levels. In general, the recommended listening levels when mixing are between 75 to 90 dB SPL. SPL stands for sound pressure level. But how can you measure these levels? There are on the market so-called SPL meters, which can help with controlling your listening levels. But there are also different Android and iPhone apps, which can help you with that, with more or less accuracy. I use Genelex GLM speaker calibration kit to control my listening levels, and most of the time I'm listening to about 80 to 85 dB SPL. But why is this so important? By listening to healthy SPL levels, you protect your ears long term. You also make the best mixing and mastering decisions at these levels because of the way we interpret different frequencies at different levels. If you want more information on this, I recommend you to learn more about the Fletcher-Manson curves. That being said, you should check your mixes at softer and louder levels, and if you want to take this to the next level, use at least a reference track while doing this. This way you'll know what needs to be taken care of further, and which should be your next mixing strategies. Number 15. Use reference tracks. Before listening to the project you're about to mix, listen at proper levels to at least a mastered finished song that is near as genre and production to your project. You don't have to listen to your reference track entirely, only for about 30 seconds to 1 minute. This way you'll warm up your ears and get them ready for mixing your new project. As a side note, reference tracks are not useful only at the beginning of your mixing sessions. You could and should use reference tracks during the mixing session, but also when you think you finished the mix. This helps you in keeping your mix on track, and it will help you in taking better mixing decisions during the session. In conclusion, audio mixing is an essential stage in the music production process. If you put the right strategies in place before touching a single fader, you will finish your mixing sessions faster, but you will also improve the quality of your mixes. And if you want to learn audio mixing step by step, enroll in my music production masterclass so that you can finally convert a song you got on your phone into a professional sounding master in less than 14 days. See you on the other side. If you like this episode, like it, share it and subscribe. By doing this, you will help me help as many audio producers as possible. And of course, until next time, stay cool and make great music.